Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Cassie Thompson, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Smartling. I wanted to welcome you all to our second webinar in the Back to Basics series. We hope you were able to attend the session last week on optimizing your translation mix, but in case you missed it, the recording is available, and we will share that link here momentarily as well. Today, I'm joined by an excellent panel to talk about crafting a translation quality program. Most of us know that translation quality is important, but it can feel super daunting to put these programs into practice with all the processes, tech, and efforts that you need to make in order for this to be successful. So we're here, and all of these wonderful ladies are going to share a little bit more about how to kind of demystify that process. Before I introduce them, though, a couple of housekeeping items. One is that we will share the recording of this session after the event. So in case you need to step out or want to share with a colleague, we'll be sharing that with all of the attendees today. And secondly, we have a lot of content that we're going to cover, so we may not have time for questions at the end. But if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A function, or email us, and we'll be happy to reach out to you with the answer. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our panel. Valerie Dehan is Senior Director of Language Services here at Smartling. She's responsible for running Smartling's quality evaluation program for our language services team and also supports customers with their own individual quality programs. Marina Sanchez-Choron is Smartling's linguistic engineer. She works in our AI research and development team, exploring all new types of advancements within translation, including quality. One interesting fact is that both Valerie and Marina have worked as translators throughout their career, and so they bring a really unique perspective as well to the panel in addition to what they do today. And then last but not least, Kyle Robb is our product manager who's responsible for all things quality assurance tech within the Smartling platform. So she has talked to many customers about the requirements for these types of programs, as well as being a customer success manager in her past role. So she's got a lot of experience to bring and chat about today as well. So Kyle, Marina, Valerie, thanks so much for being here. I'll stop there and welcome you guys to the panel.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. Valerie, I'm going to start with you on just the basics. LQA can be used in so many different ways as a word and as just a thing within our industry. So can you share with me what is the difference between quality assurance and assessment, and what does LQA actually mean?
Yes, of course. So LQA in the context of this conversation is going to be quality assurance and assessment. The other way people use in the industry, the acronym LQA is about functional testing and bug, finding bugs in their apps and so on. But here we are really looking at linguistic quality assurance and measuring quality. So basically, quality assurance is the entire program that looks at how you set up your localization and see how it's going to ensure you have high quality. Assessment in this case is really the action of measuring the quality. And it's a way to make something that is very subjective into something that is objective and measurable. You have a lot of cases where you get anecdotal feedback about the translation. Oh, I don't like, our translation. They are not exactly what I was looking for. So having a quality measure, like a way to measure your quality in an objective way, will allow you to really see what is actually wrong and whether your translations are meeting your objectives. Sometimes you are maybe looking at it with a lens that is a little bit too personal, when actually the translations were meeting the objective from the beginning. And so there are ramifications for each program, but most importantly, looking at errors and looking at what is going well, what is not going so well, will allow us to reach alignment between the people who are doing the translation and the people who are using it or ordering the translations.
Great. And you kind of touched on this a little bit already, but why has historically translation quality programs been so important?
Well, we want to know whether the translations that we're delivering are, meeting our business objectives, meaning localization will allow expansions in different markets. So are we overthinking some of the details of the translations, or actually the translations we are using for different purposes are exactly delivering on the purposes that they were created in the first place? Are we looking at internal documentation and the quality that was delivered met exactly those objectives, or we are looking at super high visibility content and where more creativity is needed, and are we meeting those objectives? Basically, you look at it in terms of the objectives of each type of content.
Great. And I think, Marina, you may have a perspective here on how AI has maybe made quality assessment even more important than it was before.
Yeah, sure. So having a TQA program in place it matters a lot, especially when you're working with AI systems. And I think there's like two main dimensions. One is like AI systems learn from data. So they're only good as the data they learn from. In this sense, it's like us. They learn from examples. They learn from the data we see. If they learn from poor translations, they'll end up making mistakes, and these mistakes can happen over and over and be amplified across many different content types or different translations. So it's what they call the garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to get good translations if you have bad data to start with. And the other thing is this TQA program, when applied to AI translations, also lets you check exactly what your AI systems are doing well, and where there may be some need for a human to intervene or to do some oversight of those translations. So, in this sense, in this last sense, TQA tells you where you can use AI confidently and maintain the quality standards. So, there's, I would say it's essential to have a quality TQA in place. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And, despite it being essential, I think one of the things that we see and why we wanted to have this webinar is that not everyone actually does have these programs in place. So, Kyle, I know you've talked to a lot of customers about developing their quality technology. What have you seen as far as it means for the percentage of companies that we work with that have already implemented quality assessment programs?
Yeah, of course. I think in this conversation, when we say LQA, we're very specifically speaking to the linguistic quality assurance features and programs and kind of schema or protocol that is pretty common across the industry and kind of the industry darling when it comes to quality measurement and getting some objective results from that. It is important as well to think about quality with the lowercase q, as in all the other things that feed into the process that can help enforce quality and just maintain that kind of consistency and experience for readers or for customers who might be looking at a different language than your source language. So there are a lot of different things, not just all capital letters LQA. I do think about 10% of our customers currently are working with LQA kind of at the highest degree within Smartling. So that very robust process with scoring, with schema, and all of the details and results that come from that. Not to mention, of course, or not to forget our SLS team, the Smartling Language Services team with Valerie, who do quite a lot of that kind of high-end quality assessment through the LQA features that we have in Smartling. But I don't want to disregard the other quality tools that are available within Smartling and really just in the translation process in general. Quality checks, of course, a very useful part of the process, can be customizable as well. And also just having users, local native speakers, people who are deeply familiar with the content involved in the process as well, all very good for quality. But when it does come to LQA, which is certainly our kind of our favorite focus today, is we have about 10% of our customers that are really actively using this feature as part of their process to not just evaluate their quality, but make sure that over time they are continuing to see improvements or results that they're happy with in a little bit more of an objective format.
Yeah, so all of that to say, if you don't have a quality program, you are not alone. There's many others out there who are in the same boat as you, but there's no better time than to start now. One other element of this is on the translator side. So I did mention at the top, Marina and Valerie, you both have worked as linguists in the past. How was the quality process for you when you were in that role? And was that helpful feedback for you to have this objective quality feedback?
Absolutely, yes. It was definitely valuable because, as soon as you understand the customer's preferences, it's making your work much easier because you're going to be understanding what they're looking for. And the whole process of cataloging errors allows to really point to the specifics of what the customer is looking for.
Yeah, in my case, I remember how much easier it was to do good LQA for some customers who had everything in place than for others. So the quality of my work, with me being, having the same brain in all cases, was very different. Just because I had to do to make a lot of guesswork where I didn't have proper proper terminology, proper TMs, proper information or communication with the internal teams. So I think any LQA program should consider this human dimension, the human experience in every single small detail, however minute it may seem. It's super important. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we're going to walk through a little bit now, sort of the tools, process, people element as we talked about, and we'll start at the top with the tools and tech. So Kyle, staying with you, what are some of the tools that teams should look for to make this process easier for them to implement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to take stock of what you're currently working with. If you have different translation tools and software that are already in your toolkit and already part of your process, the simplest way to implement LQA, which I should say it's never really that simple. It's a very advanced process, but to make it as much simple as possible, you'll want to work with something that is at the very least compatible with the tools that you already have in your toolkit. Ideally, right, it's sort of an all in-house under one roof service, something that can be seamlessly incorporated into your existing process where you keep your content, monitor progress with translations, have all of your resources that Marina was talking about, translation memory, term base or glossary, so on and so forth. Having it all under one roof absolutely simplifies it because you're just ensuring that whoever's doing the evaluations is really working with the same experience, the same environment that the translator was working with or the editor or whoever is being scored, just to make sure that there's nothing that gets lost in between those spaces. Visual context, extremely important as well. And that is a big driver for kind of the results of LQA, because that's a big indicator of what the content means. So how do we score quality? Is it accurate based on what it means? That's what we are hoping to see, all of those different features kind of combined together in the same way for the original linguist, but then also the evaluator. I think that helps a lot to implement a slightly simpler, but certainly much more scalable and reliable LQA program, combining everything kind of under one roof. I think another piece of the process that's worth considering if you are starting to look for tools or consider where LQA fits into your translation strategy overall is when you want to introduce this to the process, basically which moment you want to think about evaluation. Is it something that you want to do maybe before, say, your internal reviewers begin to interact with the content as a way of kind of evaluating the original linguists that perform work on the source content? Is it something that you want to do maybe on a regular basis? Maybe you're doing this monthly or quarterly based on content that was published in the previous month or quarter. So it really depends on where you want to do it in your existing tools, or maybe you have to find another resource based on your existing toolkit, and when you want to do it. So is this something that's part of your production process, or is this something that's a bit more retrospective and happens after the production translation workflow has been completed? Those are really important questions to think about when you start to look for tools for LQA, but also tools for translation in general, because a lot of them, Smartling included, will have some ability to include LQA in the process, all under one roof.
Thanks, Kyle. Valerie, Marina, any thoughts there on, I know, Valerie, you work within our own tools, so any element of those tools that you feel like is really important?
Like working with the tool and with a team of evaluators, I really can confirm that my experience is exactly what Kyle was describing, that the evaluators value immensely the availability of information right at their fingertip while they're doing the evaluation work. Being able to work in the same environment as where the translation happened makes a huge difference.
Great. All right, so moving a little bit on to process and people. Valerie, I know you have obviously worked on our own quality program at Smartling, but also quality programs for our customers who are interested in working with us on that. What are some considerations that you should take into account when starting up a program like this?
Yes. Well, I would say that the main one is to understand that LQA is not a low investment endeavor. It requires upfront investment and ongoing investment, and you might not see the value right away, but you need to trust that it is going to help in the long term, and we also understand that the human input is still really, really important, because even if there's a lot of research and models that are being developed right now to automate this and make it more scalable and so on, at the beginning, the human element is really important, because as Marina was saying, the models need the data and clean data. So initially, the human evaluations, which do represent a high event investment, will allow to set the tone for everything else afterwards. And also be prepared for what you find, because if you are looking for errors, you're going to find some. So let's make sure that you have a plan to know what to do with the information you are uncovering while doing the evaluation. So having a clear view of what you're going to do afterwards, what kind of action items will be developed, and also who will use the information and so on. One important element as well is who is going to be doing your evaluation. So I'll go into more details about the specific of a program, but I would say that is one of the biggest decisions as well.
Great. And I know another element is going to be around metrics and whatnot, and we'll talk about that as well. But can you talk to me a little bit about schema, Valerie, and what that means? I know that's something that kind of comes up, but just generally, how do you decide your schema, and what even is a schema?
Yeah. So one of the biggest decisions is about what framework are you going to be using, right? So at Smartling, we've adopted MQM, which is the framework that is the most used in the industry. And there are some default settings that MQM recommends. And so one of the decisions upfront is whether you're going to be using MQM as your framework, and whether the default recommendations will suit your purpose. So those are conversations you want to have fairly early on, and because once you start, you don't want to change the schema and the different weights you've adopted for each of the severity and categories that you've selected at first. You want to establish a trend before you make those changes. If you start changing every month, then you don't have really valuable data, because you are not seeing it through over time.
Makes sense. And you mentioned monthly, Valerie. I know that internally at Smartling, we do monthly evaluations. Is that kind of best practice, or does it really depend? I know Kyle talked a little bit about when you want to do it in the process, but any recommendation on timing for how often to do these things?
Yes. So at first, you probably want to do evaluations on a monthly basis, because you are looking to see where you are at, and checking that those decisions you're making early on are actually meeting your needs. So a monthly evaluation is going to give you that trend that I described a little bit earlier, and later on you can start reevaluating the cadence. But definitely at first I would recommend starting monthly.
Okay, great. And we're going to talk about people in a moment, but I do want to talk about one other thing that comes up quite often. And Kyle, I'll start with you. Obviously, typically within LQA, you're not LQAing everything, all the content, all the millions of strings and words. So sampling is a major element of this LQA program. So can you talk to me a little bit about the sampling strategies that we've seen and that we kind of have supported as part of our conversations with customers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tip number one is definitely do not LQA everything. That's going to be an enormous amount of time and effort, and it just won't get you. It won't be worth it for the similar results that you should get if you have a really good sample. So out of the total content, I think there are a couple of sampling strategies that seem the most popular. The first one, maybe for someone coming from a math and science background like myself, seems the most logical, perhaps, but important to kind of consider what you're working with, which is language. But the first sort of sampling strategy would be something that's kind of a completely randomized representative sample of your content, and that would be choosing. Let's say we want to do 1,000 words. We'll just choose totally random pieces of content that adds up to the body of the sample that we want, which is that 1,000 words. This is not a bad strategy for sampling. It certainly has its place, in particular, if you are working with a large volume of content that is relatively uniform throughout. So perhaps it's a 100-page manual. You don't want to sample, or you don't want to LQA every single piece of the 100 pages, but because it's all the same voice, the same topic, you can take a fairly random sample of sentences or strings from throughout that manual, and you should have a pretty good sample that is, again, representative of the full body of content. The other sampling strategy, which I think is more common, especially when we have kind of mixed content bases, like maybe you have your website, which contains marketing content, but also product information and some maybe like help center information, a few different things that might be combined into one sort of space. In Smartling, that might be one project, but many different jobs based on the type of content that's being kind of grouped together. And that second sampling strategy is sort of the whole text or full text version, where the goal might still be 1,000 words, but instead of taking a completely random sample of the smallest pieces that are available, you might be taking a still somewhat random, but a little bit more cohesive kind of a sample of samples. So maybe you have like 4 or 5 jobs that are 200 to 250 words each. Could be jobs. That's what we usually would say in Smartling, or even files. You could be taking the full file for each of these kind of sub samples. And that way you still have something that's quite representative of all of your content, but the evaluators are seeing each string or each sentence within the context of where it was originally translated. And then that also helps them provide feedback and record errors if there's any change in voice or inconsistencies in that text itself. So as far as I think that those are probably the two most likely sampling strategies that customers are interested in, the kind of fully randomized version where you're taking a random selection of the smallest piece of content you can, so a string or a sentence, and then the more whole text version, which is still a bit random, but there's a little bit more kind of cohesive subsamples within there. And it really depends on the use case and what your content is like, but both of those are pretty standard.
Yeah, I'm curious, Marina, I know you've done a lot of research in this area. Have we noticed anything as far as what works best in different scenarios?
I don't think there's like a single best method from the research perspective, and that's slightly different to the client perspective, I guess. So in addition to what Kyle was saying, I would say like full text sampling, if I'm looking at how good an empty system is or how good is an automatic error spotting system is, I want to send the whole text, a whole document to evaluation because I want to understand maybe consistency, how good is it, keeping the internal consistency of the document. I wouldn't send like fragments or sentences in this case. So it depends on the problem you're trying to do research on. Also, maybe you know what are the weaknesses of your system and you want to test if the latest improvements have really done something. So, for example, empty systems are typically, they may typically not perform very well when sentences are very short or very long or complex. So you may want to do like a selection based on length as well. You might want to see how good your systems are at colloquial or even idiomatic expressions. So there's a selection there. So I guess, yeah, and then there's also sample size. We discussed sample size as well. But for example, if I know I have some content that was translated by someone I know who's a very, very good translator, I would probably not send so many samples for evaluation than if someone who just has been onboarded, for example. So I guess, yeah, it depends on the purpose of the quality assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think, yeah, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to just have your kind of general monthly sample, or are you digging into a problem or evaluating a certain new initiative or your performance of your translators? So that's really helpful. Thanks, Marina. So Valerie, we talked about a lot. I'd love for you to kind of walk us through the steps, maybe recap kind of some of what we talked about. And in particular, I know one area we still need to discuss is that evaluation team. So can you kind of walk us through, if I'm setting up a program, what should I think about from a step-by-step perspective, and maybe double click on that team element?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, we've touched on a few of these decisions that need to be made when you start a new program. But I also want to say that you need to first and foremost, before you start measuring, is to look at the foundations of your program, like making sure, having a good look at your linguistic assets and making sure that you do have an updated glossary, an updated style guide, that you are providing context to your translators, very important. And then your translation memory, are you looking at an old, outdated translation memory? Have you reviewed it, made sure that anytime you updated the other two linguistic assets, you also looked at your translation memories? That is just giving you a good sense of where you are at when you are starting. And then from there, all the evaluations that you're going to bring in will really give you a proper view of whether those tools that you put in place are working or not. So yes, one of the main decisions is deciding who is going to do the evaluation. It could be internal people, internal stakeholders. The positive is that they know the company and the preferences and what you're all looking for the best. They're expert in your content. The draw side is probably that this is not their main role unless you have hired linguists for that specific tasks. But if you're just starting, you may not have reached that point. So internal people, it's not their main role. So it means that you could encounter some delays because they're not always available to evaluate. They are not necessarily experts at evaluating translations. So you introduce an element of you reintroduce that element of personal bias and subjectivity potentially, another solution is to hire a different vendor to do the evaluation of your translation team. Very positive point is that it brings completely unbiased opinion, as long as you make sure that they should only be an evaluation team and that they need to create value. Sometimes I've seen the evaluation team creating a lot of noise for the customer and not necessarily being focused on creating value. So that is something that you need to discuss with your evaluation vendor upfront. You want them to really, really make sure that they are showing you the right direction in terms of what needs to happen with your current state of affairs for translations. And there's potentially a time when that evaluation vendor may no longer be needed. That is something that they need to be aware of. Another very important decision, choosing the framework. We've discussed schema a little bit before. The schema is essentially the list of error types that you're going to want the evaluators to focus on, with a list of severities that need to be associated with the error types. So reviewing what you consider a critical error, a major error, a minor error, what is to be neutral, very early on is important. Understanding what you deem critical, what you deem major, and also making sure that not everything is critical, because otherwise nothing is critical. So really giving the right severity to the different types of error and different types of circumstances, and ensuring you are sharing those definitions with your evaluation team. The sample, we've discussed a little bit in details earlier. So what kind of strategies are you going to adopt? How big of a sample? Based on your overall volume, are you looking at a percentage of that? How big of a percentage? The cadence, the moment of evaluation, maybe you are doing a monthly evaluation, but it needs to be timed in a certain way so that you look at data, translation, at a very specific moment in time based on what was done before. What languages are you going to focus on? Is it going to be every language in your translation program, or are you going to focus on your main markets? Are you going to focus on new languages? All these details matter. And then finally, the tool, like what tool are you going to be using? And Kyle noted that it is really important to have an integrated tool, like evaluate content where the translation happened. I wholeheartedly agree with this. So find a tool that is best integrated with your translation tool and really shows the evaluators the environment where the translation happened.
Awesome. Thanks, Valerie. So yeah, just quick recap there of if you're starting a new program, you got to start with the basics, make sure your linguistic assets are up to date. From there, you can choose your framework, decide who's evaluating, figure out your sample and strategy around the moment of evaluation, pick your languages, and then finally your tool. So really 6 steps. It's easy, Valerie.
Absolutely.
Amazing. All right. A couple other topics, maybe specifically around maybe people who are already you have these programs in place, but want to make sure that these are up to date. So, Marina, we've already talked a little bit about MQM, but can you talk us through some of the key metrics that we track with these quality evaluation programs, and how has that changed over time with especially AI in the mix?
Yeah, so I think almost everyone that has an LQA program uses an error-based typology like MQM. So it's essentially counting errors and having a scoring method. So you can assign quality a number. But MQM was developed, I think it was 2012 or something like that. Yeah, it was part of a EU-funded program. And it's like the child of a previous error-based typology, which was called Lisa QA, which also had a set of error types, a set of severities, and a way of combining this to get a quality score. What MQM has is it's flexible. It allows you to kind of, when you're dealing with different content types, technical documentation or marketing content, it allows you to create specific custom typologies or schemas for its use case, which is tied to different quality specifications. Maybe you want to give a lot of importance to creativity in marketing, but you don't care about creativity in a technical document, or you may even penalize it. So MQM is this flexible, and it's like, I would say it's like the gold standard for any LQA program, because it gives you a lot of information, provided that you set it up in the right way and according to your goals. There's other ways of measuring quality. There's automated metrics that do not require having a human annotating errors, for example. Some of them are Blue, Ter, or Comet. They work by comparing a translation to a reference, and they would give you a score. But so they're good for a specific use case. For example, I'm going back to the AI quality topic. They're good to see if an internal system has improved after some fine-tuning or something. You can just run these metrics and say, okay, this has happened. It's gone up or down. But there's another even set of metrics which are called like quality estimation metrics that do not even require reference translation. They would be just given the source text and the AI translation. I would say, okay, I give this translation 0.7 out of 1. So both the automated metrics and the quality estimation style metrics have a limitation that they don't give you any information about what to do. I mean, where the errors come from. I mean, maybe you need a detailed explanation of whether terminology was appropriate, or if the translation was creative as expected, or if certain errors were fixed. So I think they have a place in these systems, in these LQA systems, maybe as a sort of first pass. I'm talking from the research perspective now. If I, for example, ran comment on a set of translations and I see they're very low quality and I want to understand why they're low quality, I can send them to a human annotator. That would be one example, but I wouldn't trust these automated systems or metrics to make any decisions on quality. So I think for comprehensive assessment, you need a more detailed approach like that the MQM provides. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So they're helpful from a directional perspective, and maybe even as we were talking about sampling and ability to help you understand what may need to be sampled more. But potentially, I mean, MQM is the gold standard for a reason, and I think many of our customers utilize those metrics. So Kyle, I know we did talk a little bit about it's all well and good to track and measure these things, but you actually have to take action. So what are some of the actions that should be taken based on the findings from an LQA program?
Yeah, I think this is where the return on investment for your LQA investment really starts to come in. Once you are starting to see results of LQA scoring, you have evaluators working in the tool that you've selected. You have the schema set up, and you're getting kind of, we love to say objective here, but of course, language is hard to make completely objective, but you're getting pretty close to objective results about quality. I think there are two different sort of responses or next steps that you'll want to take, two different categories of next step, let's say. And one of them is perhaps the most obvious. If you find an error, if you know about an error, you're going to want to fix that. So that could be errors in the translation, certainly. That is really what we're out to find here. Those translations should be updated. Seems straightforward enough. I think it is also important to use the results of an LQA outcome to improve the translation environment. So not just the actual translation text, but you'll also want to use the results to understand, okay, maybe the style guide that we have for this language is not really specific about what we want here, or maybe it's a little bit outdated, and we're learning that the translations don't match the style guide for whatever reason, or maybe the translation didn't use the proper glossary term translation for whatever reason. Many different things can kind of identify maybe inconsistencies or just opportunities to improve your linguistic assets in that complete translation environment that your original linguists are working within. Of course, we want to correct any errors that exist, but we also want to prevent future errors from coming up again, especially the same thing, time and time again. If you are ever in a situation where you notice that, over a couple of months, you've seen 3, 4, 5, 10 LQA errors that reference the same thing, that's a really great reason to go in and make sure that if it's not inaccurate or out of date in your assets and in those resources that translators use, that maybe the translator is misunderstanding it, or maybe there's just a way to improve that kind of resource base for the original translators. And this is where we see it's a bit of a feedback loop here, because the translators should be doing good work. You can give them the tools to do really good work. LQA is a great way to identify where there's some breakdown in the process, whether it's the tools, whether it's the person themselves who may have missed some information. That is the more kind of reactive, I guess, response to LQA results. We get the LQA results, we want to go and fix something. Straightforward, right? I think the other category of response that you might have to LQA results is a bit more long term. I think it's really interesting to see how results change over time. If we're talking about metrics, we want to see what is going up, what's going down. I don't think it's a thing to be afraid of if your quality scores are changing over time. They may be going down. Obviously, we want the quality to be good. We would love for it to always go up, but again, language is very human, and there are things that will change. So rather than looking at it as a failure, it's just an opportunity to continue to improve your process. If you are getting a lower LQA score, let's say for French, for 1 month, it goes from 96 to 91. Whatever your numbers are, whatever your measurement looks like, let's say it just goes down month over month. Why did this happen? Where can we investigate our process? Where can we check up on the tools and the resources that we're using, including the evaluators, including maybe our internal reviewers? Where is the process not supporting the highest quality of translations the first time around? And what can we do to make it better next month? So there's kind of the short-term response to LQA results, which is fix the errors, pretty straightforward. And then there is that longer arm where you're going to be continuing to build on your translation procedure over time with benefit of these LQA results to continue to enforce good quality and make sure that you're getting the best results from translations using LQA results to help guide that.
Thanks, Kyle. And so you kind of talked about if you do have errors and issues, but Valerie, I did want to turn a little bit to our second to last question around how can you tell if your program's working? What should you adjust if things aren't working? What are your tools and levers that you have available in order to kind of make this work for you?
So yes, you look at the trends in scores, and definitely don't panic if one score for one language drops in 1 month. There might have been changes in your translation team. There might have been circumstances that did impact the score that month. So you always want to look at results over time. And what you want is obviously have stable results. And something that Kyle touched on is that what I like about MQM is that it's not just looking at the quality of your translation, it's also a way to assess your process and to check that everything you have in place for the success of your translation is actually working. So making sure that you have the right assets in place for sure, that the tool that you are using is working for you, is the schema that you selected upfront actually working. One point that we did not touch on just yet is arbitration. So basically the conversation between the translation team and the evaluators team that really enriches the program, because sometimes the evaluators might not be aware of a decision that was based on specific information that the customer shared with their translation team that is not documented. So that dialogue between the evaluation and the translation team will enrich the program. So did we put arbitration in place when we started? Maybe not, and that is something that needs to be added. And definitely, share the results of the each evaluation with the original linguist so that they can learn and align with what the customer is looking for.
Awesome. And Marina, are there any quantitative metrics that can guide you on whether your LQA program is working or not?
Well, both Kyle and Valerie have mentioned already, like tracking MQM scores over time or decreasing error rates. I think this is like the best signal. We should allow for some variations, up and down. I mean, in between a kind of like -3-4 points, MQM should be normal. I think that's the main hard metric to track. Then Valerie also mentioned earlier how initially you should do these evaluations more frequently. I think one sign that your program is working is if you're able to kind of space your evaluations more because you have this trust. That's another thing. And also, this is not easily measured as MQM, but customer satisfaction is definitely one signal that is very, very telling about this success. So I think having a way, I think it's easier to track MQM than customer satisfaction. I don't know what Kyle and Valerie say, but there needs to be some systematic way of having information about both. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we have 1 minute left. So I want to ask the final question, which is any words of wisdom for customers? So maybe let's keep it to a sentence or so if we can, challenge ourselves. Kyle, I'll start with you.
Great. I'll offer a few catchphrases for this. Start small, stay involved, and trust the process.
Marina, any comments there?
I would say, I would add to that, like kind of be open about what translation quality is and how, how linguists or evaluators perceive it. And I would give the same advice to linguists. It's not just one-sided. So yeah, keep your mind open.
Valerie, end us with your thoughts here.
Don't panic if you receive negative anecdotal feedback. Start measuring.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This was so much information, so helpful, but I think really actionable, which is awesome. I really appreciate your time today. Hope everyone enjoyed the session as well. Don't forget to catch our next session with Olga Baragavaya, who's Marina's manager and our VP of AI, and Jen Wong, who leads our product strategy, all about centralization of your translation process, and that's happening next week. So thanks again for joining, and we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.